day.
It's been a big couple of weeks.
But particularly today, you've had a real test with Stuart Nash. Tell us why he remains in Cabinet.
So clearly, Stuart hasn't met the expectations that I would have of him, or that I think New Zealanders should have of a minister in the Cabinet. And I have to weigh up then what the appropriate response to that is. In terms of his, earlier issues earlier in the week, he lost the police portfolio. Clearly, some more things have come to light. I've considered those in light of what the response was to other ministers in similar circumstances, and I've made the decision to demote him and to put him on a final warning.
Prime Minister, he is a repeat offender. We've had 3 incidents now come out over the past 3 days. Why does he remain in Cabinet?
So I have to consider, ultimately the facts of the case, the motivations behind the case. In all of them here, there was no personal interest involved. It wasn't like he was advocating for some of his friends or people who he knew, which has been in the past circumstances in which ministers have lost their jobs. In this case, he was advocating for constituents. He chose an incorrect process. The commentary, the choice of words that he had in commenting on matters before the court weren't an appropriate choice of words for a minister to use. This is a reminder, I guess, to all ministers. So they have to be more careful in the words that they use to other politicians and to other members of the public.
Well, that is exactly the point, isn't it? Because when you are a Minister of the Crown, you have power, but you also have responsibility. And it seems to me that he has been cavalier in his approach, and he has done it on multiple occasions.
He's ultimately faced a consequence for his comments and for his actions, and I do expect that he will do better in the future. But as I said, I've carefully weighed this up against the sanction that's been applied to other ministers, other members of Parliament in similar circumstances.
Well, other ministers who have lost their portfolios, they have also been ejected from the executive as well. He's the only one that I can see on this list here of 14 that hasn't been stripped of his cabinet roles.
It depends on the circumstances. So, like I said, it depends on the circumstances. If you look at, I carefully reviewed that list as well of other ministers who have lost their roles and the circumstances around that. And in some, many of those cases there was a personal nature to it. So they were advocating on behalf of a friend. There was a personal interest in it, so they stood to gain personally from their decisions or from something that they had been involved with. That's not the case here.
Well, this is a real risk for you, though, isn't it? Because how do you know that there's nothing else?
I've spoken to Stuart to get a reassurance from him. He made that reassurance early on, and then 2 other things have come out. I've impressed on him the importance of making sure that he's carefully thinking back as to whether there are other issues that might come up. He's given me an assurance that he's carefully thought that through. I think the key thing now is he knows that he's on a final warning. I'm sure that he's going to be extra vigilant from here on in to make sure that he is upholding the standards that we would expect of a minister.
I want to look at political management more generally now, and I want to look backwards and then we can look forwards. Your Prime Ministership has so far been defined by your burning of policy. You've come up with $1.7 billion that you can put towards the cost of living crisis. What I'd like to ask is, why was this work not done by your government last year?
The previous Prime Minister indicated before Christmas that we were going to need to go through a reprioritisation process at the beginning of this year. I think our government has demonstrated over the last 5.5 years that as circumstances change, we need to change and we need to be able to adapt to them. So our priorities in 2020 were actually quite different to what they were when we became government in 2017, because the situation had changed. We were dealing with a global pandemic. We had to recut our cloth accordingly. Now we're out the other side of much of that pandemic response, and we're facing a new set of challenges around the economy and around recovering from 2 recent natural disasters that have had a significant impact. So we need to go through again and we need to recut our cloth to meet the circumstances.
Absolutely, but what I'm asking is, inflation began spiking in June of 2021. This crisis that we are now in, this cost of living crisis, has been in the post for around 18 months. So many Kiwis will be looking at the policies that you've burned just this year and thinking, the government was running in the wrong direction, chasing unpopular policies that were ideologically driven, while they've been struggling to make ends meet in a cost of living crisis, Prime Minister.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that we haven't been looking at the cost of living, challenges over that period of time.
But it hasn't been your single focus, which it is now, and what I'm asking is whether that should have been the case 12 months ago.
Well, it's certainly been a focus of the government. So if you look at the fuel tax reductions, the half-price public transport, the cost of living payment, the winter energy payment, increases to the minimum wage, these are all things that the government has been doing to support New Zealanders through what is a really challenging set of economic circumstances.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think anybody's saying that you haven't done anything at all. But why was this not your focus last year, as you have made it at the start of your Prime Ministership? Why was the government pursuing unpopular policies that were irrelevant to New Zealanders at a time when they were struggling with a cost of living crisis?
Well, look, I don't want to spend my whole time looking backwards, but what I would say is that we have needed at the start of this year to say, look, there are things that we would like to do, but now's not the right time to do them. I think what I also said, and I've been quite open about this, is I think to some extent our government was trying to do too many things all at the same time.
Well, was it doing the wrong things, Prime Minister? Running in the wrong direction? That is a lot of bandwidth.
And I think, if anything, we were stretching the bandwidth a bit much, with too many things on the go at the same time. And I think we have needed to reprioritise and refocus. That's what I've been focused on, leading the government through.
Yeah, so you do acknowledge that actually those policies that you have put on the bonfire and burned, essentially, they were policies that were not reflective of the priorities of New Zealand.
Well, New Zealanders' priorities have changed in the last few years. Again, let's go back to 2017, different circumstance. 2 years ago, New Zealanders' number one...
I'm talking about last year and the things that you've just burned.
At the beginning of last year, New Zealanders' number one priority, according to all the polls and all the research, was COVID-19, and now it barely features in terms of the issues that New Zealanders are anxious and concerned about. New Zealanders' priorities have changed during that time. Government needs to make sure that we are reflecting New Zealanders' expectation of us.
Do you acknowledge that those policies were not in line with the priorities of New Zealanders?
I'd acknowledge that some of those things were things that would be nice to do. There was merit in them, but not right now. They're not the number one priority at the moment.
So you've made your ability to own mistakes a central plank of who you are as Prime Minister. So why can't you just acknowledge to voters, we got it wrong, and the time and energy that went into those could have been better spent?
Oh, look, I'll own my mistakes. Where I make a mistake, I've been really upfront with Kiwis. I'm a human being and I will make mistakes. I'm bound to make some in the future, and I'll endeavour to own those when I do. And I don't think I make more mistakes than other politicians. I think I do own them a bit more, and I'm a bit more candid and a bit more honest about them than perhaps some other people are. In terms of the government's overall approach, though, I'm not going to provide a commentary on my predecessor, or we're different people. We've got different priorities, and I don't think that would be fair.
No, but if you were sitting here, Prime Minister, I would be asking her the same questions, and you are now the Prime Minister. You were around that cabinet table, you were taking those decisions, and so you're accountable now.
Absolutely, and I'll totally be accountable for the decisions that I make as Prime Minister and that the Cabinet makes, and I've set out really clearly what I want us to be focused on.
And so will you acknowledge that actually the policies that you were pursuing last year, the government was out of touch?
I don't think necessarily out of touch. I think we needed to refocus and reprioritise, and that's what we've done.
Why do you think the government was losing support last year in the polls? You're a political animal, you will have looked at this. Yeah,
look, I think the second half of 2021 and then through 2022 was really challenging for New Zealand and for New Zealanders. I know people don't like to talk about the global pandemic anymore, but clearly our exit from our elimination strategy was a bumpy road, and that created some really big challenges for Kiwis. Up in Auckland, I know that they're still feeling the after effects of the lockdown and everything that went with that, and clearly that affected their support for the government. Let's be upfront and acknowledge that. And there's still a legacy there. There's still the tail end of that's out there. I think through 2022 we saw a different set of challenges emerge. The cost of living clearly became one of the forefront issues for New Zealanders, and they wanted to see us refocus on that. I'm absolutely certain that we are now refocused on that, and they're going to see real clarity from us in that space.
But that's an admission there, that actually that was the focus for New Zealanders in 2022, and now, it's only now that you are reprioritising. That is why you started losing support, that soft support in the polls, isn't it?
Look, I think if you go back again, I wouldn't say that we've only just started focusing on the cost of living. But
that's not my question,
well, no,
Prime
but through
Minister.
2022, there were other things we had to focus on as well. You know, as COVID-19 made its way across the New Zealand community for the first time, in the first half of last year, that was a big issue for New Zealanders. And we had to actually make sure that we were getting that right. Otherwise, the consequences could have simply been that we experienced what the rest of the world did, only on a different timetable. We've managed to come through that with one of the lowest mortality rates, the lowest number of deaths from COVID in the world.
We're not talking about COVID
but we had to do that in the first half of last year. And I don't think New Zealanders would have expected any less of us.
But by the end of the year, people were pissed off. The sentiment around the government was not good. That is where you were at with the electorate, Prime Minister. I
think New Zealanders, you know, there was a cumulative effect of a number of things. Like I said, I don't underestimate the exit from our COVID elimination strategy and all of the bundle of issues that went with that, the Auckland lockdown, the vaccine issues around vaccine and vaccine mandates. All of those things cumulatively had an impact on the government, along with a new emerging set of issues around cost of living, around a general kind of sense of frustration. Things like the weather events, for example, I think, you know, I think there's a hankering amongst New Zealanders for, you know, can we just have a bit of normal life for a period of time where there aren't all of these unexpected events? You know, I think it's been a heck of a lot that Kiwis have had thrown at them in the last few years.
Well, the good news, I suppose, is that people seem to like you. And we've already seen some smart policy this week, credit where it is due, Prime Minister. The cost of living inflation adjustment that will sit well with superannuitants, with students, with people on fixed incomes as they struggle, those rising costs. But what's next?
What's next is, you know, guiding New Zealanders through, leading New Zealand through some challenging economic circumstances. Now, one of the challenges around, you know, one of the really difficult balancing acts that government has at the moment, and New Zealand's government in particular has at the moment, is making sure that we're supporting New Zealanders through a challenging set of economic circumstances without contributing to those. And inflation poses a real challenge for us there because, you know, the combination of high inflation and the potential for, you know, for New Zealand to tip into recession. It's a potential at this point. I'm not going to forecast that that is what is going to happen. Some of the economists are and some of the economists aren't. So it's a difficult balancing act, and we need to lead New Zealanders carefully through that.
And so how are you going to do that? Because this is not a new problem. This, like I said, this has been in the post now for 18 months. So how is Chris Hipkins going to lead the country through this next and quite crucial part?
I think we have to acknowledge inflation has stayed higher for longer. You know, if we went back a year and a half ago, most economists wouldn't have predicted that global inflation and New Zealand inflation was going to stay as high as it has for as long as it has. One of the best things we can do as a government is focus on doing what we can domestically to bring our inflation and therefore, in time, our interest rates back down again, because that's going to be a significant help to household budgets. And that is going to constrain government activity. It is going to mean that some of those nice-to-do things that, you know, we might otherwise think about doing, we won't be able to do in the short term.
But are we going to see policy and governing this year from your government? Because it is 7 months out from an election. It's a very short runway that Kiwis have, but we can't really afford to waste more time, can we?
Look, I think you've already seen policy and governing from this government under my Prime Ministership that is very much focused on the issues that we've got in front of us right now.
But that is not a complete fix, Prime Minister, and you would acknowledge that. So what's next?
Well, the government's got a very busy work program. If you go back and look at the statement that I made to the beginning of Parliament this year, it's about 20-odd pages long, and it's got a lot of detail in it about what we are doing. What I've been focused on is saying, let's actually declutter that a bit. Let's make sure that we're really honing in on the things that are going to make the biggest difference.
Well, we have on one side of this Parliament right now, we have Christopher Luxon doing a sort of dance of the seven veils with all of their policy. We get it sort of bit by bit. And on the other side, we have you setting fire to your party's previous sort of policy agenda. But actually, we're in a crisis. Many Kiwis are in a crisis. They have been in a struggle now for over a year. Don't they deserve ideas from the opposition and policy and governing from you?
Well, they're getting policy and governing from us. I think, if there's one thing that I would reflect critically on over the last 5.5 years, we've actually had lots of big ideas. I think to some extent what we're doing at the moment is just making sure that we're really being careful about how we prioritise and sequence delivering those big ideas so that we are actually delivering on them in a timely way.
So you have big ideas?
Of course, there are many big ideas.
Specific to this?
Well, there are many big ideas. If you look at our work in climate change, there are big ideas on the table around climate change.
I'm talking about new ideas. You've said you're reprioritising the work of the government and to address the cost of living crisis. Are we going to see new policy from you this year which will directly attack that for New Zealanders?
Oh, you'll certainly see more moves by the government to help New Zealanders through the cost of living crisis, to make sure that we get our economy, into as good a shape as we can, given the global circumstances that we face. You'll absolutely see a relentless focus by the government on that. And of course, you're going to see new things around rebuilding following the recent natural disasters that we've had and the challenges that they have highlighted for us, not all of which are immediate.
So what is your message to middle income earners who are being stretched right now by the cost of living crisis? What is your message to them in this moment?
Well, I absolutely hear you. I hear the concern that you have. I know that you want to see the government absolutely focused on getting the cost of living crisis under control and supporting you through that.
And?
Well, and you'll see already in the short time that I've been Prime Minister, the last 2 months, it feels like longer already, but in that short period of time we've already done a number of tangible things that have made a difference to household budgets, extending the fuel, the fuel tax discounts, extending the free half-price public transport.
These are old ideas now, Prime Minister. These are not new ideas under Chris Hipkins. This is not the sort of reprioritisation of the energy of the government. And if I'm sitting at home and I'm getting stretched on my mortgage and I'm looking to a new Prime Minister who says he's going to make it his absolute priority to attack the cost of living, what I've heard from you is just that you understand. Not all of the ideas that are on the table at the moment are bad ideas. There are lots of good ideas already on the table. Are there new ones coming? I don't know that we need lots of new ideas. I think the ideas are already there, and some of the old ideas are actually good. So there's nothing coming specifically for them? I would never say that. But what I would say is, we're absolutely focused on the issues that, we know are right in front of New Zealanders. Well, philosophically, do you agree that there is, let's say, a class of people in New Zealand who are not paying a fair amount of tax? These are sort of high wealth individuals who are not paying fair tax on their houses, on their salary or their assets. I absolutely agree that there's a group of New Zealanders who are working very hard and don't feel they're able to get ahead. And there are a group of New Zealanders who are doing very well at the moment and in some cases are able to avoid contributing back to the country sort of their fair share. They're avoiding tax? Some people are able to structure their finances so that they don't pay the same degree of tax as others do. It's a complicated, a very complicated issue to address. And I'm very mindful that all debates about tax come with significant political risk associated to them. So I can see where this line of questioning is going to go next. Great, well, I'll go there. And I'm not going to announce any tax policies today. No, but are you open to finding a way to tax those people, let's call them those high wealth individuals? Look, as I've indicated, I'm not making, policy on tax right now. But are you open? I'm not asking you to make policy to rule anything in or out. I'm saying you're open to that. The tax policy that we set out at the last election continues to stand, and we will set out a very clear tax policy before the next election so that New Zealanders know where we stand on all those issues. How advanced does that work, do you think, expected before the budget? Look, like I've said, New Zealanders will know well in advance of the election where we stand on tax issues. I want to switch to foreign affairs now, because things are heating up in the Pacific, and I know that this is a focus for you in that foreign affairs area. Just this week we've seen Australia sign a deal for nuclear-powered submarines with the US and the UK. And the consensus between those countries seems to be that China is preparing to invade Taiwan. So they are lining up on our back doorstep. Where do we stand?
The developments in Australia, so the Australian relationship with the UK and the US is ultimately a matter for them.
Sure,
but they are, all three of those countries are very important international partners for New Zealand, collectively and individually, as is Canada. As you know, we have a very strong relationship with China and a trading relationship with China as well. New Zealand's foreign policy is proudly independent. We will always act in the best interests of New Zealand and New Zealanders. That doesn't mean we're always going to have the same, foreign policy position as our close friends, but it does mean we'll continue to work very closely with them.
Well, the former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating has said that this is the worst decision in Australia's history, that the submarine deal is not about defending Australia, it's about defending Taiwan, actually. But either way, we do know where Australia stands on this issue. They are saying where they are loud and clear, and that is helping the US. Where are we, Prime Minister? What is our position?
Look, I'm not going to provide a commentary on another country's foreign policy.
No, I'm asking you where we stand.
Including our good friends in Australia. Those are ultimately questions for them.
But where do we stand in this dynamic that is ramping up in our own region?
We will absolutely maintain an independent position.
What does that mean?
Where our relationship with China, means that there are opportunities for us to work together, we will do that. Where we disagree with China, we will state that, and in many cases we will state that publicly. In some cases we will state that privately. We are an independent country and will continue to be.
So what happens when China invades Taiwan?
Again, that's a hypothetical question, and we don't make foreign policy pronouncements based on hypotheticals.
Does that mean that we will stand on the sidelines? We won't get involved?
Not necessarily, but it does mean that we don't make, hard and fast pronouncement based on hypothetical situations, and no New Zealand governments have done that previously.
Okay, we've reached my favourite part of the interview. A quick fire section. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
A bit of both.
If you weren't a politician, what would you be?
I do love doing things, practical things. I like to build things, I like to make things. So maybe something in that area.
You really love politics, don't you?
I definitely do, yeah.
You're a dad now. How did becoming a parent change you?
Look, I always find talking about family really difficult because I try very hard not to talk about family, but there's no doubt that becoming a dad settled me down a little bit and perhaps gave me a little bit more perspective on things, a little bit more chance to sort of remove myself from work on a day-to-day basis and just focus on sort of the basics of life, which you do when you're a parent. And so it's probably made me a bit more of a grounded person.
It's a thing that happens for lots of people. And any regrets in life, Prime Minister?
Life's too short for regrets. I always believe if you look back on your life, you'll think of things that if I was going to go back and do that again, would I do things differently? Undoubtedly, there's heaps of those. But if you spend all your time thinking about that, you don't take the opportunities that are right in front of you. So I think you always have to keep kind of looking forward. Life is too short for regrets. The mistakes that we make in the past, the things we do in the past, which we might look back on and think, what was I thinking when I did that? They're actually the things that make us who we are and actually help us to shape our futures.
It seems like we have ended this interview where we started. Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you could hear that, how